The arc of the moral universe is long, and it bends towards justice. We've heard these words invoked famously by Martin Luther King Jr. during the March to Selma and throughout the Civil Rights Movement. This was a part of Dr. King's brilliance, the way he drew upon a long tradition of prophecy, both biblical and historical. He regularly read and drew inspiration from the prophets of the Jewish Bible, such as Amos, Isaiah, Jeremiah, and abolitionist preachers during the Civil War era as well. And more recently, that phrase popped up again in some of the speeches of President Barack Obama, who used it to minister to justice-loving people during serious setbacks or dark moments during his presidency. However, some of you may already know that they were not the original words to King nor to Obama. Instead, they were first spoken by Unitarian abolitionist minister Reverend Theodore Parker in a sermon in 1853. And I have heard many of you wondering these past few years, especially these past few months, and even this morning, Tony, about the length of the arc. And if I really believe that to be true, does it bend towards justice? Your questions often arise when you are treading at the edge of despair, when you wonder about the progress you thought perhaps humanity had made. But you see, prophets are not fortune tellers, defining the ultimate outcome for humanity. That is not what they do. They do not place their ultimate faith in humans at all. They are like the tornado siren, jerking you awake to the presence of very real danger if your actions or your non-actions continue as they've been. They are like the harbingers of either certain doom or certain glory, depending on which outcome calls you forth, greed here on earth or service to a higher justice. In Theodore Parker's original words, what he actually wrote was this: I do not pretend to understand the moral universe. The arc is a long one. My eye reaches but little ways. I cannot calculate the curve and complete the figure by experience of sight. I can divine it by conscience. And from what I see, I am sure it bends toward justice. Now, Theodore Parker is not talking about the ultimate direction of American democracy. No, he is describing the moral universe, that it bends towards justice. Now, hopefully, we meet it by our hands and our efforts, but the moral universe itself bends in that direction. This statement offers a spiritual authority divined by conscience. The moral universe is greater than each tiny action here on the ground or large action here on the ground, but it is also inclusive of it. Yet he is also musing with humility about all he cannot fully understand. And I, too, can become very reductive about opinions I do not agree with or that I truly do not fully understand. And right now, I am facing the situation of having to truly deal with and confront some opinions and ideas that I truly cannot understand. When I consider some of our most flagrantly immoral leaders, the ones who triple down on lies, who quadruple down on cruelty, I often make assumptions about their mental state because I cannot actually grasp their worldview. Like, I can't grasp it. It is not beyond my understanding necessarily. I think it derives from a deep darkness about the nature of humanity. But I just don't spend too much time trying to understand it either. I try always to stay enamored instead of visions of justice and equity and a better world for all. You know, one of my preaching teachers said it is far easier to describe hell than to describe the kingdom of heaven. And I think we see that sometimes, and even the politicians we agree with spend far too much time describing the nature of hell than the kingdom of heaven, where we're trying to get to. So what is happening to the arc of the moral universe today? Is it bending towards justice? It doesn't often feel like it these days, does it? But what is happening to us right now, the reason our bodies feel weary, like I've heard from many of you that you're like on the edge of catching a cold, kind of all the time, or the reason we struggle to arise from bed some days, or the reason we can't quite hold on to our train of thoughts quite as well as we used to, is that we, I'm afraid to tell you, are the walking wounded. We are, all of us, we are suffering from moral injury. Moral injury is understood to be the strong cognitive and emotional and psychological response that can occur following events that violate a person's moral and ethical code. It was originally studied and named out of combat experiences in military settings, but it is not specific to one occupation. And in fact, each week, more and more of us become injured. CDC directors who had to carry out orders to fire their colleagues and shut down programs they have worked on for decades are suffering mightily today, as well as those who had to suddenly vacate jobs that were saving lives, and they knew it. I will give you the update shared by my personal dear friend who was fired this week after a successful career in global public health. She writes, she asked that I not name her name. She wrote, "After 7 years, I was fired from the CDC this week. It has been the honor of a lifetime to have spent my career working towards a very clear mission: prevent babies from being born with HIV and to find and treat those children and adolescents who had already been infected with HIV so they could live long, healthy, and productive lives. I have spent my 13-plus-year career trying to work myself out of a job because pediatric HIV is not only treatable but preventable. I worked tirelessly to make sure that the best HIV medications in the world were available to every child who needed them. I studied the development of HIV drug resistance in children and worked to ensure countries had treatment plans that meant all children could have HIV successfully treated. I volunteered regularly treating children and adolescents living with HIV in addition to my full-time job duties so that I could be sure the technical assistance I was providing was informed by real-world practice. I've collectively spent numerous months away from my children and family over the years because I believed wholeheartedly in the importance of the work myself and my colleagues do for the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, PEPFAR. I am not heartbroken for myself right now, though, because I wasn't the only CDC employee fired this week. Not only did I get fired, but CDC's entire maternal and child health branch was terminated along with at least 2,400 other amazing CDC employees. So I am terrified at what this means for our most vulnerable women and children around the world, for the long-lasting impacts these cuts will have on individuals, communities, and diplomatic relations for decades to come, for the 1/3 of children who will die before their first birthday if aid and human resource disruptions prevent the diagnosis and treatment of their HIV infection. Heartbroken, terrified. We know deep in our hearts that this is wrong. And even if these decisions saved most Americans a few dollars on their taxes, sacrificing babies and children's lives across the world would not have been worth it. One possible outcome of moral injury is moral outrage, which I am hearing in this room right now. And yesterday, many of us found ourselves expressing our moral outrage on the streets of Atlanta, marching, carrying signs. UUCA showed up and showed out, and it was a productive example of healing our moral injuries. On a day like yesterday, you can see Theodore Parker's moral universe taking shape, bending towards justice, and the voices singing, "We shall overcome," and protesting a government that has vowed to deport and disappear us, to rescind our bodily autonomy, to impoverish us, and to make us more vulnerable to disease. You have seen the bumper sticker. If you're not outraged, you're not paying attention. That has never felt more true in my lifetime than it is right now. Yet, if you are only outraged, that will not be sufficient. The internet is filled with people sharing their outrage without discernment. Spend too much time there these days, and you will plug yourself into a wall of rage and outrage of people whose main activity that day was to express their outrage and then hit post. There. I have expressed my outrage. I have done something. Now I can go about my day knowing that I have done something against this regime. This is a problem. Is posting your outrage on social media a meaningful act against Project 2025, the most immoral political plan in our nation's recent history? No. It is not. I'm afraid it is not. And Theodore Parker would agree with me, by the way. Now, I am claiming him as a Unitarian prophet, but that does not mean he was perfect. Parker held ideologies that were not actually aligned with racial equity, that were quite damaging, but he was nonetheless clear about his abolitionist imperative. In particular, he called on people of faith to actively violate the Fugitive Slave Law of 1850, requiring that formerly enslaved people be returned to their owners, even if they were in a free state. The act also made the federal government responsible for finding, returning, and trying people who had escaped slavery. After this law was passed by Congress, Parker illegally officiated a wedding for a couple who had been enslaved and then supported their safe passage to Canada. Two things I could see myself definitely doing in the next couple of years, if things continue. He also evolved his position, his earlier in life position on nonviolence, famously keeping a revolver at his desk where he would write his sermons. Here is an excerpt from a sermon he wrote in November of 1850 called "The Function and Place of Conscience." "This is now the law of the land, and it is plain to me that it is the natural duty of citizens to rescue every fugitive slave from the hands of the marshal who tries to return him to bondage, to do it peaceably if they can, forcibly if they must, but by all means to do it. For my part, I will resist such an officer as gently as I know how, but with such strength as I can command. I will ring the bells and alarm the town. I will serve as head, as foot, or as hand to any body of serious and earnest men who will go with me, with no weapons but their hands in this work. The man who attacks me to reduce me to join in slavery in that moment of attack alienates his right to life," he said. "And if I were the fugitive, I could escape in no other way, I would kill him with as little compunction as I would drive a mosquito from my face." Now remember, Parker was a Unitarian, not a Universalist. But you can hear that moral outrage, right? Can't you? The holy anger that shaped a clarity that drew a line in the sand about what he would do if he were approached by an enslaver who at this point were hunting people to round them back up. I thought about that moment yesterday as I watched police cars turn on their lights on Claremont Road and race toward Plaza Fiesta. I couldn't help but relate to Theodore Parker's outrage and conviction, how quickly our thin red line can shift when we suffer from moral injury under our own government. In his thesis about Theodore Parker's life and theology, our own Jim Kelly, told ya, described the ultimate destination of Parker's turn away from nonviolence as a means of ending slavery and defying the Fugitive Slave Act. Reverend Theodore Parker was one of the secret 6 co-conspirators who met with John Brown in his Boston hotel room to plot the ill-fated raid on the federal arsenal at Harper's Ferry, Virginia. Brown's plan was to use the weapons captured at that arsenal to equip an army of formerly enslaved people who would rally to his banner and then to conduct guerrilla warfare from the Blue Ridge Mountains. Though John Brown's raid was unsuccessful, it was also the moment that many historians credit with launching the Civil War, escalating the issue of abolition, and Parker continued to uplift John Brown as a martyr and a saint for his conviction and his escalation of the abolitionist cause. So, knowing that Reverend Theodore Parker is our spiritual ancestor, what do we do with this outrage, this anger, this moral injury today? By the way, I'm not saying if you want to post your moral outrage on social media, you can do that. Just not only that. So what do we do with it? Whether the wound is deep or whether it feels more like being slashed with 1,000 tiny cuts. Well, one thing we do is take our outrage to the streets, lift our voices in peaceful protest. Yesterday was stunning. In over 1,400 separate events across America and outside of America, estimates of well over 500,000 people marched against the policies of this administration peacefully. The next thing we do is we organize, we strategize. Last weekend at the Soul Summit, this leadership conference we held right here, we heard from Reverend Lisa Garcia Sampson, Executive Director of the North Carolina UU Justice Ministry. She spoke to us about their political wins they have made in that state, made possible by the power of relationship building between congregations and immigrant rights groups, trans activist groups, and trust built over time with various partners, grassroots partners. Unitarian Universalists across North Carolina spent years of Mondays writing coordinated letters to the editors in every paper across the state. They spent years of Tuesdays blowing up the phone lines of their state legislators. They spent years of Wednesdays visiting the Capitol with coffins and making speeches on the front lawn. Spent years of Thursdays providing childcare so folks could attend meetings with their union reps or their organizers, and spent years of Fridays calling the local news stations to invite them to the action, which was happening on Saturdays, marching in the streets, and then they spent Sundays refilling their cups, celebrating all the good work and their faith that called them to the work. That is how they won Medicaid expansion in North Carolina, applying their moral outrage and their moral outrage to their work, their toiling work of saving lives. And it took years of coordinated action. And this is how we keep our own lifeblood flowing in the direction of justice, not curdled by a good anger swallowed, but connected with the good anger. Not to sit and soak in it, nor invite others to join the outrage so we can all sit behind our screens and repeatedly tell each other to, look at this. No. Now is the moment to let our anger shine through us. As the poet suggests, to be the burning bush, to transfiguring our helplessness into power, transfiguring our stuckness into movement, transfiguring our doubt into faith in the greater love that will set us free. So we can believe in ourselves and believe in each other that we will not only survive this moment, but we will usher in the next moment, but only through the movement. So we can hear the prophecy of our Unitarian heritage and tradition speak to us so loud in our ears, even now. I do not pretend to understand the moral universe. The arc is a long one. My eye reaches but little ways. I cannot calculate the curve and complete the figure by experience of sight. I can divine it by conscience. And from what I see, I am sure it bends toward justice.